All right, so as Democrats continue to stare directly down the barrel of a potential 2022 midterm bloodbath without really blinking an eye or doing literally anything to remedy the situation for themselves, we have yet another reminder here in polling data that just came out from Morning Consult in terms of just how uncomplicated politics can be at some times and how easy it would be for Democrats to try to bolster their chances in the midterms if they literally just leaned into economic populism in any way, shape, or form. So this data specifically is concerning the child tax credit, which, if you guys remember, was essentially tanked by Joe Manchin, who was floating out the idea that parents were going to be using this child tax credit money instead of on their kids or on any of their material concerns that were facing their families at the time. Essentially, he came out and said that parents were going to be using it on drugs, okay? On drugs, as if we are literally still in the politics of the 1990s. Joe Manchin condemned literally millions and millions of families back into poverty by essentially completely making up this bullshit justification when the reality was, as we know from the data, that the vast majority of parents were using this money to directly help their families and to keep a roof over their head and keep food on the table, etc. So, nothing, out of the normal here, absolute ghoul shit from Joe Manchin, but the consequences of that are not only felt in the, material reality of the millions of families that were plunged back into poverty by Joe Manchin and the rest of the Republican Party, but the consequences are also in the political realm, and you can see that very clearly here in the data from Morning Consult. They say Democrats have lost electoral edge among child tax credit recipients. So voters were asked if they were more likely to vote for the Democratic candidate or the Republican candidate if the election for Congress in their district were held today. And you can see here recipients of the child tax credit payments back in December when they were still alive and before they had been killed at the end of December by Joe Manchin. You can see here, it's really not even fucking close. Democrats had a 12-point advantage of 49% to 37%. Then, the end of December, the child tax credit expired. And boom, what do you know, just within a matter of a couple of months, it's damn near a tie. And now the reality in April, early April, where we are right now, Democrats now have a lead amongst the people who are receiving the child tax credit payments. Now, listen, you don't have to give Republicans any credit whatsoever because they didn't do anything to earn these people's votes, right? This is simply a matter of Democrat incompetence, whether intentional or not intentional. This is just a result of a complete failure of the Democratic Party to not lean into economic populism, which then leaves this void for Republicans to come in and start, using the narrative of inflation or using all of these other things like culture war issues that they like to focus in on, and using that as justification to say, well, you don't like the status quo, you're not doing well financially or economically with yourself or your family, so, vote us in by default, essentially. So this is entirely to blame on the Democratic Party for failing to pressure the members of their own party in order to fall in line on this very simple and very popular and desperately needed policy proposal and get it past the finish line so that you didn't lose this entire gigantic voting block. So again, you can see it in the all voters here reflected as well, roughly tied back in December. Then you have a Republican jump, roughly tied again now. But among this constituency, you can see where Democrats could have made up a substantial difference here if you just fucking extended the child tax credit. And listen, I've showed this poll so many different times, and there's probably going to be a shorter video than most of mine because it's really not that fucking complicated. But if you go back and you look at the 538 averages of Joe Biden, now it's, how unpopular is Joe Biden, but if you go back to when he was much more popular, in fact, the time where he was the single most popular of his entire presidency was right about here when he had a 55.1% approval rating on average. And if you look at the date down there at the bottom, it was roughly March 22nd of 2021. And that's when he was at his peak approval rating. And what do you know? March of 2021 is exactly when the $1,400 stimulus checks were being delivered to the American people. So listen, this is not fucking complicated, okay? The way that you increase your approval rating amongst the American people, the way that you prevent a potential bloodbath in 2022 is by leaning into economic left-wing populism. That's it. It's not that fucking complicated, but Democrats are not doing that. In fact, they are basically feeding into the Republican narratives of, inflation scare tactics and now leaning into austerity. We saw in Joe Biden's most recent recent budget proposal. There's nothing big or bold or FDR style in terms of social programs, but there definitely is a massive increase to the military budget. So leaning into the Republican attacks that Joe Biden is somehow soft on imperialism or whatever the fuck, and also leaning into austerity and talking about how his top priority is national defense and tackling the budget problem, as if that's a real problem that is materially affecting the average lives of the American people. So Democrats are completely whiffing on all of these very easy policies that they could be implementing right now. I just covered in my video the other day. It's not just the child tax credit. There are so many other things that even if you didn't have Congress, even if you just throw your hands up and say, Joe Manchin is what he is, we would never be able to sway his vote on the child tax credit. Well, you could go to so many other things, including executive orders that Joe Biden has the authority to do unilaterally by himself, like canceling student debt, which again, I talked about in my video the other day, that would have a substantial impact in motivating people to show up to vote for you in 2022. So what is the conclusion here? I don't know. Is it purely incompetence on the Democratic Party side? Is it just a neoliberal vision or willingness to appease Republicans and appease this conservative mindset instead of trying to lean into anything even mildly left-wing on economics? I don't know. You guys tell me. But the reality of the situation is, as Democrats come out and pretend like they actually believe that Republicans are the greatest threat to democracy that we've ever seen, or that Republicans are this grand assault on the country as a whole, they're simultaneously doing absolutely nothing to prevent them from taking power in 2022 and 2024.